So, today we're going to talk about what's called the incumbency advantage. So, your essential question for today is why is it relatively easy to predict who will get a seat in Congress? And I like to break this up by talking about what is called the incumbency advantage. And I'm going to define that for you today. And then we're going to talk about what that actually is and why this is that we can predict who will get a seat in Congress. And we're going to focus a little bit on visibility and credit claiming and this concept called casework and position taking and weak opponents. And then we're going to wrap up on this concept called gerrymandering, which sometimes people call gerrymandering. And along the way, we're going to do some activities. So we have a variety of things we're going to be looking at this week. And hopefully this will help you understand some major issues that are happening in government. So let's jump right into it by talking about the incumbency advantage. Now, what does that mean? Well, an incumbent is people who are currently holding an office who are running for that office again. So, for example, in the presidential election of 2020, Donald Trump is the incumbent, right? He is currently the president of the United States. He is running to be the president of the United States again. And so we call him the incumbent. If you take a look here on the screen, you'll see that this is a picture of me with our Congresswoman, Jamie Herrera Butler. She'll be running again for office in November of 2020. She currently holds the office as the representative from the 3rd Congressional District here in Washington State. And so as a result, she is the incumbent. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of the definition of an incumbent, I want to make sure you have a sense of like how often an incumbent gets reelected. Now, I'm going to stay focused on the House race and the Senate. So we're going to talk about Congress and we're not going to be talking about the presidency today. But in the House of Representatives, it is a 90% likelihood that the incumbent is going to win re-election. So if you're Jamie Herrera Butler, again, featured in the picture right next to these bullet points, she feels fairly confident that she is going to win her race because it's a 90% likelihood that a representative is going to win their seat again. In the Senate, it's an even narrower margin, meaning they have an even higher likelihood of winning. So realize that if you currently hold the seat, it's most likely you're going to win that seat again. All right, so why is that? Well, there's a couple reasons why, or there's a few reasons why, more than a couple. And so we're going to talk about those reasons today. And the very first is visibility. Visibility happens when a candidate or incumbent is like seen all over the place. They're seen on media, they're seen in advertising. And this happens when they put themselves out there, like in a public way. So, for example, several years ago, Representative Jamie Herrera Butler marched in the Planters Day Parade, right? She shows up to the parade, she waves her hands, people can see her, she can hand out pamphlets, etc. Like this makes her visible. Or another example might be the fact that like they send advertising through the mail. Now, Herrera Butler has the ability to send advertising, and I'm going to use that term loosely, as you're going to find out, but she can send advertising home and not pay for it. She doesn't have to pay for postage. We call that franking, and I'll say that again, franking. Franking is when a person who serves in government has an ability to send things through the mail with no cost. So she can send franked materials to your home and not actually have to pay for it. Meanwhile, somebody who's running against her actually has to pay the postage for everything that they send. So she has a franking privilege. That's an advantage. So let's talk a little bit about credit claiming. Now, credit claiming is a way to enhance a standing through the service that a representative or senator has done for the people in their district. So, for example, if you're Patty Murray or Maria Cantwell, those are our two senators. They can talk about all the things that they have done in Washington state. And by doing so, this gives them a record, right? And in their record, they can show, here's what I did, here's what I accomplished, and that gives them a more likelihood of getting elected because, well, they have like a record to stand on. So it's really, really important for them to address that and for them to talk about, here's all the things that I accomplished. Under credit claiming, they can also talk about bills or laws that they were able to get passed. That is a really significant concept. They can talk about how they served their voters through lawmaking. So let's say that they have voters in their region that need to have a bridge built, like our bridge on the I-5 bridge. There's some concerns that we need a new bridge. We call this the Columbia River crossing. And so Herrera Butler could go into Congress and say, I need to get, $80 billion. I have no idea what it would cost, but $80 billion in order to build this bridge. And if she secures that $80 billion, she can then use that as an example of ways that she is serving her voters. Another way that an incumbent can help through credit claiming is through casework. And casework is by helping their voters individually. So I love to talk about the story about my great uncle. And in 2004, my grandfather passed away. And my great uncle, which is my grandfather's brother, was serving in the Peace Corps in a remote area of Africa. And I needed to get this message to my great uncle that his brother had passed away. And I had absolutely no idea how to contact him because I knew that he wasn't in a city. He didn't have a cell phone on him, certainly didn't have a landline. He didn't have access to email immediately. So I was really stuck and I needed to let him know. And so I called my representative and said, well, how do I get a message to somebody in the Peace Corps? And they said, let me see what I can do. Within 30 minutes, my friends, 30 minutes, I was on the phone with my great uncle who was in Zambia, Africa. Like they were able to expedite that work. Now that representative can say, listen, let me tell you about the case of Sherry Condit's great uncle. Like I am serving my voters. And so ultimately that's an example of casework. It's when they do something very specific for you to help you. Position taking is when a candidate can talk about where he or she stands on issues, which is a big deal, right? Because like they have a voting record. And if you're running against an incumbent, you have no voting record to talk about. So all you can theorize is how you might vote. And if you're looking at how somebody did something versus how they might do something, it's a lot easier for folks to go, yeah, well, I know where they stand because they've had to go through this experience before and they've taken a stand on an issue. So position taking is a very simple way that a candidate, particularly incumbent, can rely upon things they've done in the past. And lastly, weak opponents. So an incumbent has an advantage because oftentimes it's really hard to find somebody of high quality who wants to run against an incumbent. After all, why would somebody want to run against someone who has held a job for 24 years, right? That's really hard. If that person's been elected 12 different times, if they serve in the House of Representatives, like they have a really strong track record. It's really hard to run against somebody who's been elected 12 times. So oftentimes there's just weak opponents in general. So I'm going to stop, and we're going to talk a little bit more about gerrymandering in our second lesson for the week, where we're going to do an activity. So hopefully the incumbency advantage makes a little more sense to you, and you understand what an incumbent is, and that you understand a little bit more about why they tend to win more in elections. All right, have a great day, and I really hope to see you guys soon.